Hi guys, welcome back for Chapter 2, Key Issue 2. This one is focusing on why global population is increasing. However, we are going to also be focusing on why in some cases it is decreasing. So I think an important thing to keep in mind is when we talk about population, it's really important to know that it works differently if you're talking about a developed nation versus a developing nation, right? Or an MDC versus an LDC. So in LDCs, population is continuing to grow, whereas in most MDCs, population is starting to decline. So we're going to kind of hit on both points, and your book does the same thing, which is why I don't know why he asked that question at the beginning of it. Really, it should be about both. Okay, so when we're talking about population growth, demographers use these figures primarily to make predictions about future growth and then to actually see in a year how much a country's population is growing. So the first thing they look at is CBR, which is annual number of births per 1,000. So if you take 1,000 people in a year, how many babies did they have? That gives you the CBR. CDR is the same thing, except we look at deaths instead of births. So how many, 1,000 people, how many of them died in a year? That would be the CDR. So to get the natural increase rate, which is the thing demographers really look at to see how much a population is growing overall, you take the CBR and from it you subtract the CDR, and that number is your natural increase rate. And in MDCs, it's a pretty small number, like 2.1 or 1. In some MDCs, it's actually 0. Populations aren't growing at all. In some MDCs, it's a negative number, which means that they're declining. In LDCs, that number is a little higher, okay? And if that seems kind of fuzzy to you, we are doing a project in which we are going to practice calculating these numbers for different countries. And oh, my dog's freaking out. Margie! Okay. So if it's fuzzy, we're going to practice this a lot in the coming weeks. The next is, how do demographers measure population health? Because demographers are not just interested in how many people are within a population, but also statistics on that population specifically. So, one thing that demographers look at is the TFR, or the total fertility rate. You probably have noticed, by the way, that there are a lot of these for your key terms in Unit 2. The terminology is really important. Luckily, the definitions are really straightforward, but I would just say that you don't want to just know what the CBR is and what the CDR is. You kind of want to talk about like how demographers use those and examples of places with maybe a high CBR, a low CBR, things like that. So total fertility rate is not how many babies are being born, because that's what the CBR is. Fertility, by the way, has to do with like a woman's health and how fertile she is. I don't want to get too like sex ed about this, so I'm going to leave this kind of vague. So TFR is what demographers take to make predictions about what future growth might be. So they will look at how many women in a country are of childbearing age, and they will make assumptions about how many of those women will be getting pregnant, and that can tell them something about future growth. Mortality rates come in 3 different categories. There's total mortality, which is how many people are dying in a population overall. And then 2 more specific types are infant mortality. So that is when babies die up to a year after they are born, how many of them are dying. And then maternal mortality rate is measured by how many women are dying because of some sort of complication due to childbirth. And oftentimes it can be much later on. I think that's kind of confusing, but that can be up to a year after they've given birth as well. And you guys are going to learn a lot about that because your article that's coming up is on maternal mortality. The other thing they could look at is life expectancy, which is just the average age that people are when they die in a country. I think in the U.S. it's not as high as it should be. I think it's 73 or 74. My dog is doing laps around the house. I think in Australia it's one of the highest. It's like 84 or something like that. So pretty impressive. Okay, so talking about TFR. So total fertility rates are typically higher in LDCs and lower in MDCs. So this chart shows you really well, okay? So from 1950 to 2045, so again, we're making predictions, right? Africa has the highest total fertility rate. Positively, though, it is, I mean, it's a good thing that it is going down. So you will notice that the trend is for, in most of these places, total fertility rates are going down, which is a good thing if your population is beyond carrying capacity, right? That's a good thing. But you will definitely notice that Africa and Asia and Latin America are high as compared to the more developed regions of the world, which is the orange, okay? So why is this? Why do MDCs have lower total fertility rates than LDCs? Well, because more women in developed countries work outside of the home, which means that they are more likely to have less babies or not have babies at all. Sorry. More women are educated beyond the elementary grades, especially in MDCs. So if you are more educated, it's more likely that you will have a career. So women who are more educated are more likely to work outside of the home, right? There's more access to contraceptions in MDCs. Again, I'm not going to give you a share lesson here. Look up what a contraceptive device would be, and that would be an example. Basically, it's things that keep you from having babies, right? Like the birth control pill would be a good example. And also societal and cultural understandings, right? So in MDCs, it is more accepted for women to work outside of the home because in something like the United States culture, we understand that women are more than mothers, right? Women can be lots of different things. Where in some LDCs, it might be more culturally understood that a woman is a mother, that is her sole purpose. She's probably not going to work outside of the home and things like that. So, mortality rates, so IMR and MMR, also tend to be higher in LDCs versus MDCs. And a lot of this is for very similar reasons that we just talked about. What I would add with MIR and MMR being high is that it's probably because of a lack of access to quality health care. If women are not properly cared for during their pregnancy or after they give birth, they are more likely to die. Same with infants, right? So if babies are born and then not properly cared for, not receiving things like vaccinations, which is the next little point there, then they are more likely to die. Also, if a woman is not getting proper nutrition during her pregnancy, that's dangerous both for her and for the baby. And proper sanitation also kind of goes with access to quality health care, right? If women are living in decrepit conditions, they're not safe places for babies to live. Babies can get sick. On top of that, you don't have vaccinations. You can see that there's kind of a trend here. So, kind of a gloomy topic, but now we're going to move on to how to read population pyramids. So these are the visuals that demographers use a lot because population pyramids can tell us a lot about a country's population. So the way that you read these, obviously at the top here we have the country and the year. Typically this is where you'll find them. And then we have men on the left. Males are always on the left. Females are always on the right. This one kind of colors it for you blue versus red. Sorry, I have the hiccups. But they're not always in the same colors, so I wouldn't memorize it by color. I would just always remember males are on the left, females are on the right, okay? On the bottom, we have the population in millions, okay? So right here, that's representing 9 million. And then in the middle here, we have ages. So the way you would read this is in the United States in 2010, girls between the ages of 5 and 9 were about, let's say, 10 or 11 million, okay? let's do men in the United States in 2010 between the ages of 75 and 79, okay? Older population, around 3 million, okay? And I'm going to keep going back to this. There's other figures I'm going to talk to you about, but for now, that is how you read a population pyramid. So, the dependency ratio is another factor that population demographers will look at. So, dependency ratio, definition-wise, is pretty easy to remember. It's the amount of the population that depends on the working population for support. So we're talking about the young and the old, okay? So let's go back to our population pyramid here. So the young are people who are considered to not be old enough to work yet, okay? So that would be these guys down here. The old are the retirees, right? So this population up here. So the reason demographers care about the dependency ratio is because if you have it so the bulk of your population is not within working age, it's quite likely that you're going to have a strain on resources, okay? So for example, if you have a really large youth population, that could mean an eventual lack of employment opportunities, okay? Because eventually all of those kids, all of these kids are going to grow up. So if you had a very large youth population that then aged into the employment age, but the number of jobs didn't go up, it could mean that you have a large unemployed population. So, and of course you're going to need lots of pediatric resources, lots of resources for childcare. Children are expensive, and it can be a strain on the population if there's a high amount of them. So high elderly population also can result in a need for resources. So things like retirement services. You have a lot of countries who have high elderly populations. That affects the culture because you have a lot of working age adults who are also part-time caretakers for their parents. It can be a strain on health services. Both youth and elder populations need a lot of health care and access to health care. So in both situations, it can mean a shortage in the workforce and things like that. So 2 examples I gave you. The first is Germany after World War II, and actually Germany today. Germany's population is shrinking, and they have a large elder population with not the youth population that is going to age into that. Okay, like the elder population is too big. They eventually will die off, and then they're going to have a shortage in their population. So things that they're doing are they're opening their doors to migrants, especially from Syria. We're going to watch a documentary on this in a couple of weeks. And the current situation in Japan, I'm going to leave it at that for now because we're going to watch a video in a second that's going to explain that better than I can. Oh, there it is. Hold on. One more thing I wanted to talk about. This right here, see how these are jutting out more than everything else? When we see that, we call this a baby boom. So all of a sudden we had a lot of babies that were born after World War II, and now this age group, right, these 50-year-old and 60-year-old bunches, those are called baby boomers. So, talk about that really quick before the video. So, after World War II, lots of men come home, and they're excited to see their wives, so lots of babies are made. So this red stuff right here are the babies that are being made, the boomer generation, as they're called. The average amount of children per household increased, and this is great, except now the baby boomers are aging, and eventually they're going to be part of that dependency ratio. And the United States kind of needs to figure out how to support that population without a strain on resources. So there's going to be a need for lots of retirement care. Things like second-story homes might be a problem if they're not equipped for elderly populations who have difficulty with mobility. There's also fears about the strain on Social Security. that this population is going to possibly cause. So that is something to keep in mind. A good example of why baby booms matter. This is a good example of a baby boom. The same thing happens in Western Europe, by the way. Oh, yes, and the sex ratio is something else that we can look at when we look at population pyramids. So, again, males on the left, females on the right. You want these to be pretty equal because males and females together, we know, again, I'm not going to do a share lesson for you, but that is how you make babies, right? You need those two things. So, if they're uneven, that could mean that pairing isn't happening, and that could mean that you have a decline in population growth. So, pretty well balanced here in China, and it's very subtle. You can't see it super well, but China has a problem, especially in the rural areas, not so much in the cities, where there's more women to, there's more men, sorry, a lot more men to women. So men are having a hard time finding women in which to reproduce. So a lot of this has to do with the one-child policy, which we are going to talk about, I believe, in the next key issue video. So kind of put a pause on that.